Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marked. We are wrapping up the book with chapters 19 and 20. So, you know the drill, we'll just jump right into it and go from there. Chapter 19, Gwen. Gwen sat alone in Marjorie's personal chamber, nursing her pained flesh and bruised throat. Her experience with Simon had been violent and unexpected. Again, she lamented accepting the rune before knowing fully what it would require to accept it and what it would cost her. The door to the chamber creaked open and Gwen jumped involuntarily. I told her she needs to rest, but she refuses to, Marjorie was saying to Emil as they walked into the room. Gwen stood up and clenched her jaw to keep her teeth from chattering. Simon's rune was making her body thrum with power, and she was burning up, her flesh hot to the touch. We need to get on the road, Gwen said. We can leave tomorrow, Emil replied, frowning at her. You look like the gods stole your soul. I feel like they did, Gwen replied. The fingers on her right hand started tremoring and she balled them into a fist, her nails digging into her palm and reopening her cut. She didn't even feel the pain, barely felt the blood slicking between her fingers. Are you all right? Emil asked. She stepped closer, looking Gwen up and down. When their gazes locked, Emil's eyes widened briefly, but it was long enough that Gwen saw the surprise in them, and possibly fear. You took a dark rune? Her tone was on the border of incredulous. I didn't know, Gwen muttered. No one warned her? Emil asked, turning to Marjorie. I tried to, but she was adamant in her decision. Simon even showed her his lines. Emil made a noise in her throat, clearly displeased. She shook her head and grabbed Gwen by the hand and led her out of the room. Where are you going? Marjorie asked, following after them. We're leaving, Emil said, and you can't stop us. I won't stop you. You are free to come and go as you choose. Gwen said she wanted all of the runes we offered, and I want to make sure she's changed her mind. I'm certain, Gwen said. Thank you for everything, but we need to reach Haddon's, and we're already short on time. Very well, Marjorie said. Farewell, Quinley. May we meet again. Gwen offered a tired smile before Emil continued pulling her down the hall. All Gwen wanted to do was sleep, but she knew she didn't have time to rest. Not yet. Emil led her through the library, and then suddenly they were back at the stable. Gwen looked around, confused as to how they got there. She had no recollection of anything other than being in the library. How did we get here? She asked. Emil gave her an odd look. We walked, she said. The whole way? You need to sleep, Emil said. I can't. We have to get to Haddon's. Why? What's in Haddon's? Gwen's jaw quivered against her will and she waited for it to subside before answering. The leaders of the rebellion are holding a meeting. It's in 2 days, she stammered. Even if you were rested, we couldn't make that trip in 2 days. We have to try, Gwen said pleadingly. We have to. Emil shrugged. Fine, it's your funeral. No, it'll be yours, Gwen thought. The stable boy brought their horses out, and Gwen struggled to climb into the saddle. Her muscles were like jelly. With the help of the boy and Emil, she was able to get situated, and Emil led the way out of the city, following the wall until they reached the main gates and taking the road northwest. Gwen weaved in and out of consciousness, her eyes refusing to open, to stay open. She swayed in the saddle and almost fell off her horse several times before she leaned forward and laid her head against the horse's neck and succumbed to her exhaustion. When she came to, they were still riding, and the city behind them was long gone. I thought you died, Emil said from beside her. I had to check your pulse to be sure. How long was I out? About an hour. Gwen was surprised to hear that. She felt like she'd been asleep for days. Despite the shortness of her nap, she felt invigorated. The strength had returned to her muscles, and the tremors were gone. Her body still thrummed with magic from the dark rune, but her body temperature was back to normal. Can't believe you took a dark rune, Emil said. Most mages don't survive the process. It was pretty sadistic, Gwen confessed. I thought Simon was going to choke the life out of me. They rode in silence for a short time. Then Emil asked, Who gave you the runes? Gwen opened her mouth to reply, then caught herself. Marjorie had sworn her to secrecy regarding the council's ability to restore runes despite the fact that they were wizards, and she didn't want their wrath coming down on her. The council members had some of their assistant mages give me runes, Gwen lied. She could feel Emil's gaze on her and suspected the woman knew she was lying. Simon is one of the assistant mages? Yes. Interesting. That's also the name of one of the council members, Emil said casually. And? You're hiding something, Emil accused. It's funny that you should think that, Gwen replied, considering I know what you did. I've done many things. You'll have to be more specific. Just forget it, Gwen huffed. She wasn't in the mood for this, nor did she want to confront Emil yet. She wanted the rebellion leaders present when she laid out the events of Olivelle. Are you afraid you'll upset me? Emil laughed. Spit it out already. Gwen ignored her until Emil brought her horse closer and grabbed a hold of her wrist. What is it you want to say? Emil asked. Her tone was serious, menacing almost. Let go of me, Gwen demanded, trying to jerk free of Emil's grasp. When Emil didn't release her, Gwen got angry. Her face flushed with heat, and she looked Emil in the eyes. I know you're the one who poisoned the Thaystra River. Emil's expression barely changed, but she stiffened slightly. What are you talking about? You dropped the vial that held the poison, Gwen said. I saw it, and Marjorie confirmed it was a magical poison. You told Marjorie it was mine? No. They stared at each other as the horses continued to trot along the road. Gwen's heart was racing in her chest. She was afraid. Emil wasn't one to be trifled with. Why did you do it? Emil shrugged. Just following orders. What? Eridor told you to poison the river? Gwen's mind couldn't fathom that. Of course not. Eridor is weak. Then who? Gwen asked. I suppose there's no use in lying now that you know, Emil said. The order came from Torian. Gwen almost fell off her horse in shock. You're working for that tyrant? Your surprise is cute. I told you before that I work for the highest bidder. Who do you think has more money? The rebellion? Don't be ridiculous. Emil was a traitor. She just admitted it. Gwen knew she was in trouble now. There was no way Emil was going to let her continue living after revealing that. Gwen swallowed hard, her eyes going from Emil to the road ahead. There was nothing but fields around them. Emil would kill her and get away with it. Gwen snapped the reins, and her horse sped forward. You can't run, Emil shouted after her. Yeah, Gwen cried, urging her mount faster, but the horse shrieked and staggered, its legs buckling. The animal collapsed, tipping to the side. Gwen threw herself from the saddle at the last moment, hitting the ground and rolling out of range. She got back onto her feet and saw the horse was dead. Blood seeped from its eyes and nostrils. Gwen turned to face Emil as she approached. The woman was insane. She needed to be stopped, but Gwen had a fraction of the runes Emil did. The odds were against her. 3 globes of green light appeared in Emil's hand, and she hurled them at Gwen. They struck the ground around her, and the dirt and grass sizzled and melted. Gwen summoned the power of her fire rune and stretched out her arms, hoping the blast didn't harm the horse. She spoke the rune's name and released the magic. A wave of crackling fire poured from her hands. The rune on her side grew warm and tingled her skin. Emil cursed and spoke the name of a rune, erecting a magical shield around her and the horse. Gwen's flame struck the shield and fizzled out of existence. Emil's mount came right at her, forcing Gwen to cut off the magic as she jumped over her fallen horse to get out of the way. Gwen was thrown to the ground as something heavy struck her from behind. Rough hands rolled her over, and she looked up at Emil. Had she jumped off her horse? What were you planning to do? Turn me over to Eridor? Emil punched her in the mouth, and Gwen could feel warm blood on her lips. She licked it off and winced as her tongue touched the wound. Yes, Gwen said. You will pay for your crime. Emil laughed and punched her again. I thought you had potential, but I was wrong. You're like the rest of them, weak and foolish. Because I want freedom from oppression? No, because you want to upset the order of things. If Torian wasn't meant to be king, Cameron would have fended him off and defeated his brother. Things always work out as they are intended to. You're insane, Gwen growled. She tried to buck Emil off her, but failed. Emil punched her again, and Gwen's vision blurred for a brief moment. She grabbed onto Emil's wrists and tried to gain control. She knew she wasn't as strong as Emil, so she reached for the power of the Might rune. Before she could summon its magic, the Dark rune called out to her. Gwen flinched away mentally from the darkness, but its pull was undeniable. Drain Sao, she uttered. The magic flared to life, and Gwen felt an influx of energy entering her body. She didn't understand what was happening at first. Emil gasped and tried to break away from her, but the rune held her firmly in place. And then Gwen realized what the rune's power was. It was sucking the life force out of Emil. Gwen's stomach churned and she felt sick at the realization, but the rune continued to pull Emil's energy away and filter it into Gwen. She wanted it to stop, yet she also wanted more. Her desires conflicted within her, confusing whirl of dread and hunger. Stop, Emil begged breathlessly. Her shoulders sagged, and the life in her eyes grew dim. Please. Gwen wanted to stop, but she couldn't. The rune was directing her, bidding her to finish the task. I can't, Gwen panted. A shadow passed overhead, but Gwen was too focused on the thrilling feeling of Amel's life being sucked away to care what it was until something roared and broke her focus, cutting off the magic. Amel slumped backward, and Gwen crawled out from under her, looking around fearfully. The shadow passed over again, and Gwen looked up to see a massive silver dragon. It spiraled lower and lower until it landed, stirring up dust and loose grass. Gwen immediately recognized Venya from Olivelle. What are you doing here? Gwen asked. Saving your life, Venya huffed. Foolish humans. I had it under control, Gwen replied. Is that why you almost killed her? Dark magic should never be used so carelessly. If you had taken her life force into you, it would have killed you both. Gwen's expression turned horrified. I wasn't... How did you know what was happening? Dragons see everything, Venya said. Gwen remembered Venya saying that before, but she just assumed it was a figure of speech and not something literal. This isn't over, Emil rasped. Gwen looked at her in time to see a rune on her arm glow before she vanished. Where did she go? Gwen demanded. Wherever she wanted, I suppose. That doesn't matter. Climb on my back. Do what? Gwen asked. Get on my back. We're going to Haddon's. Gwen stared at Venya for a moment, thinking the dragon was joking, but Venya lowered her shoulder and waited patiently. Gwen slowly stepped closer and placed her hands on Venya's scales. She hesitated. We don't have all day, Venya growled. Gwen climbed onto Venya's back, settled herself in a spot between the dragon's shoulders and neck. With a powerful flap of her wings, Venya launched into the air, and Gwen screamed. Venya flew up, high into the air, then leveled out and headed northwest. Whatever you do, don't fall, Venya roared into the air. Gwen held on as tightly as she could and lowered her head against the wind. Amel had betrayed her and the rebellion. She would tell Eridor everything, and then she would track Amel down and kill her.
Chapter 20, Connell. Connell leaped across dead bodies to chase after Briok. Torgra saw him race away. Where are you going? I'll be back, Connell shouted over his shoulder, plunging into the forest. Up ahead, he saw the struggling Briok weaving unsteadily up the mountain. Stop! Where are you going? What are you doing? Ignoring him, Briok pressed on, staggering doggedly forward. Stop! Where are you going? You need help. Connell dodged trees to catch up, surprised that the mortally wounded man could maintain such a pace. Connell's speed kicked in, and he managed to overtake the druid as he struggled over a rock cropping. Help me, Briok gasped, lifting a weak hand to point higher up to what appeared to be a cave opening. Where are you going? Connell grabbed Briok's arm and placed it over his shoulder, wrapping the other arm around the druid's waist to help him walk. Up there. Why? I'm dying. What's up there? Connell's face hardened, a sudden feeling of overwhelming loss flooding within him. Safe. Connell's breathing became labored. But now Briok's legs straggled with each step, and by the time they reached the cave, his legs dragged behind him, the toes of his boots leaving parallel trails on the leaf-cluttered forest floor. Inside the cave, Connell gently placed Briok on his side on the dirt floor and kneeled beside him. The arrow had penetrated close to the heart, and the barbed end protruded on his back. With each heartbeat, blood pulsed out of the wound. Connell glanced around the darkness, wondering how Briok knew the cave was here. It was larger than he realized, with a tall ceiling and going back for some distance. Briok's eyes fluttered as he struggled for breath. Listen, not much time. Yes? Dragons will help you. Must return. He inhaled a rattling breath. Give it back. Give what back? Heaven guard. Dragon's home. Give it back. Sacred. Briok groaned. Few left. Promise me. Sure, I promise. What? Protect us. Briok's eyes closed. Protect who? Connell pleaded. Briok opened his eyes to gaze at Connell. Dragons. Only 12 left. 11 now. You must save us. I will, I promise. So not understanding, Connell was willing to agree to anything. Peace settled across Briag's face and he smiled. You are the one. I knew it from the beginning. He closed his eyes, the tenseness in his body sloughed away. Connell sat back, inhaling a mournful breath, feeling very much alone. A dull silver glow enveloped Briag's body, and the rune on his arm began to glow, brighter and brighter. Suddenly, the body began to stretch and grow, changing color and texture as it pushed out. Startled, Connell scooted back on hands and feet like a scuttling crab, watching as the body grew larger and larger, forming wings and a tail and the head of a dragon. The arrow, once protruding out Briag's back, popped inside the dragon's chest, though leaving a bloody wound behind, yet the feathered shaft remained visible near the dragon's heart. Once the body stopped growing, Connell stood and gaped at the dead dragon stretched before him, his mind jumbled, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Yet the all too obvious conclusion that Briag was a dragon in human form was more than he could fathom. How was it possible? Understanding began pushing its way through the overlapping and conflicting thoughts as a slavish pursuit by dragon hunters suddenly made sense. He startled as he suddenly realized that Drustin must also be a dragon in human form. Alarm vibrated within as Briag's last words replayed. Dragons, only 12 left, 11 now. You must save us. His first instinct was to race back and urge Lorcan and the others to immediately head for Clagmoran, or wherever Drustin was, but he remained and stared at the dragon who was once Briag. Or was this Crag? He shook his head, realizing the real reason Briag wasn't there when Crag came to visit. What did he mean by give it back? Connell frowned as he stared at Crag, wondering what he should feel. He had come to like and depend on Briag, and at first had been upset at the man's passing. Yet that Briag was a dragon knocked that emotion off the pedestal. Sure, he was upset, but the man was the dragon. Should he be more upset? Especially as there were only 11 dragons left? He needed to get to Drustin before anything else happened. Connell turned and stepped to the edge of the cave, realizing for the first time how high up it was, as he stood on the edge and gazed out over the tops of the trees of the vast forest. Casting a last look back, he descended into the forest, wondering what Drustin was going to say or do once he found out his brother was dead. His return elicited more than a few polite yet stern rebukes. Don't ever do that again, Galadir quietly chastised. While you are a formidable warrior, you are not impervious to injury or capture. You needed to let us know where you are. Connell wanted to say that he could take care of himself, but instead, you're right. My apologies. Briag is dead. I know. You do? I was too late to stop the archer who slew him. Connell peered at him, recognized the pain of guilt. It's not your fault. We all knew the risk that comes with battle. You're back, my lord, Lorcan said, his relief obvious. Please, my lord, don't run off like that again. I'm responsible for your safety. You're right, Lorcan, and I apologize. I promise never to do it again. Torgith came strolling up, an impish grin curling the corners of his lips. I told him you'd be back. Tried to get everyone to hide just to see the look on your face. Where's Briag? He's dead. Torgith's smile vanished. Connell turned to Lorcan. We need to meet up with Drustin and the others. What's our status here? We're ready to move, my lord. Injured? We lost 8 killed, 23 wounded, 2 seriously. We've taken 156 prisoners. The rest are dead. We watched Connell glance around as if expecting someone. He was one of the casualties, my lord, he gently informed him. Maldwick? Yes, my lord. Connell's shoulders slumped and his lips tightened. He'd come to really like the man and knew he could count on him no matter what the cost. Where's Saren? Lorcan hesitated. They've left, my lord. Left? Connell stiffened, his nostril flaring. She said to tell you that they're not soldiers, but highwaymen who only know how to steal and rob. His eyes softened. Do not hold it against her, my lord. It is for the best. Maldek was cut from a different cloth. He was smart and a loyal man who would obey without question. Yet he pushes people beyond their level of comfort and ability. Saren knows her limits. Still, she is loyal and will provide us with information regarding Tirmanak. Connell grimaced and swiveled his head to glare at Torgwith. I'm going to be mad at you if anything happens to you. Me too, Torgwith replied with a crooked grin. How about we get going? I haven't seen that obnoxious brother of mine for far too long. We're ready to move out, my lord, Lorcan reminded him. Beto has your mount. He pointed back towards where the road curved around into the forest. Take charge, Commander. Connell stepped to the side to wait for Beto. They met up with Drustin and the Dwarven army a day later, just across the border to Gudrum Dur. Drustin took the news especially hard that his brother was dead. I'm so sorry. Connell stood inside Drustin's tent, gazing tenderly at the druid, whose whole body ached with sadness beyond comprehension. What are we going to do? Drustin muttered, shaking his head. Connell cast a glance over his shoulder at the activity within the wide encampment spread out over the surrounding countryside. Together with Lorcan's army, there were close to 7,000 dwarves and humans in a combined force. Lorcan and the Dwarven King were in huddled planning when Connell excused himself to talk with Drustin. Drustin looked up to Connell, his eyes moist. Did he say anything to you? He said something about Havengard and giving it back in Sacred and Dragon's Home, and none of it makes any sense to me. But I do know one thing. You are a dragon. Drustin stiffened and shot a look past Connell to see if anyone else heard. Please keep that to yourself until I decide to reveal myself. Sure. Now explain to me what it meant. Connell scooted a field chair close to Drustin. One thing I did notice was that anytime dragon hunters were close by, a rune on his arm would glow. Drustin's eyes popped wide. Dragon hunters? How many? Where? We've eliminated them. At least all we know about, Connell reassured him. Drustin flipped his arm over to glance down at the rune on his forearm. It was dark, revealing there were no dragon hunters close by. I swore to him that I'd protect you, Connell said. But I need to know what I'm protecting. Tell me about Havengard. Drustin seated himself on the cot. There was a time when dragons roamed freely. We lived in Havengard and other locales, but Havengard was our capital city, our refuge, our sacred place, for it's only in Havengard that dragons could reproduce. I won't bore you with the history of why we dwelt in Havengard, but know that we still hold the place sacred, especially now that our numbers have diminished to less than a dozen. If we cannot claim Havengard again, then truly, dragons will cease to exist. How is that possible? Connell argued. Havengard has been ruled by humans for hundreds of years. You forget how long dragons can live. Okay, point taken. But how did humans end up ruling Havengard? Drustin exhaled a slow sigh. Treachery. Dragons cannot work the earth like dwarves or humans. The council met and decided to trust humans to build our refuge. It all seemed to be going well, and we look forward to a time when dragons would have their own city, a place sacred and holy where we could procreate. That lasted almost until the last stone was in place. Suddenly, our friends became our captors, led by a man called Watson, a mason by trade and a wizard by reputation. The hunt for dragons began with him. Those who call themselves dragon hunters are bound by the same spells that evil man created. Drustin looked away for a moment, then returned to his story. Yes, dragons are powerful, and in alliance with the right people would be quite the combination. But no one can fight everyone at once, for that is what happened. Humans and dwarves hunted us down. Not elves? Drustin shook his head. No, elves intuitively understand the balance in the world. It was because of the elves that we managed to save a remnant. It was the elves who discovered the runes of change that would allow us to appear in human form. Some of us called ourselves half-druids because we were merely dragons in human form, albeit with the strength of dragons. Obviously, we had to be careful lest someone discover the truth. And there are 11 now? Yes. They are scattered throughout the kingdoms. With Briac's death, there are 5 males and 6 females. But time is running out. Just like humans, there comes a point in a female's life when she is no longer able to reproduce. 2 of our females have reached that age. It won't be long for the other 4. If we do not reclaim Havengard, you won't need dragon hunters anymore. We will die of old age, never to rise again. Connell stood and started pacing. Did my father know all this? Drustin shrugged. The story of dragons in Havengard is lost to memory, except for dragons and those scholars who spend their days studying they've done something. Briac and I had time he arrived in the city, Torian ruled. He closed his eyes in reverie. How odd it was to walk the streets of our city again. It had been over 100 years the last time I was there. It took a while, but we found the home where we lived. It's all changed now. The building has been bricked in and apartments built in levels. It's a very fashionable place and part of the city now. He smiled. I had to laugh at the stories developed over the years as to why the streets were so wide. One such fable had the streets had to be wide enough for a 4-team carriage to turn around. He opened his eyes and pierced Connell with an intense stare. Will you keep your promise? Or do I place my hope in another? You know who I am, Connell evenly replied. I will repeat the last words your brother spoke to me. He said that he knew that I was the one, that he had known it from the beginning. Nothing's changed. We go to reclaim Havengard before it's too late for all of us. The end of book 2.
Yeah. One more to go. So make sure you come back next week for the beginning of book 3. Have a good one, everyone.